Hello. In this video, we're going to have a look at a perplexity, at a conundrum that Maimonides confesses to have in one of his earliest writings, his commentary to the Mishnah, specifically the 8 chapters that form his introduction to the Masechet Avot, the so-called Ethics of the Fathers. Its question, or the conundrum, concerns whether the Torah can command us at all in matters of belief, to believe something or not to believe something. This conundrum, this perplexity, Maimonides calls it in Arabic chira, same word that's used for the perplexity that he discusses in his masterpiece, Guide of the Perplexed, has not attracted much attention because it was rather quickly resolved by Maimonides in his book of Commandment, Sefer Mitzvot, and we'll come to that later on in the presentation. But I think that even for those of us who are interested in the history of Jewish legal thought and in the development of Maimonides' own thought and his path-breaking activities, would be interested in having a closer look at this conundrum and its resolution. Now, in the 8 chapters, Maimonides, basing himself on what is essentially a Greek theory of the soul, which he received by the mediation of Abu Asr al-Farabi, looks at the soul and accepts the classification of the soul into 5 parts, or 5 powers, or 5 faculties, which are concerned with operating the human organism in 5 different areas of activity. And when coming to the question as to which of these faculties would be the subject, which would be the ones that are supposed to implement divine commandments, he comes to the conclusion that only 2 of the 5 faculties which he recognizes, or which the science that is there recognizes, are able to be the subject of biblical legislation. The faculty responsible for sensation and the faculty that arouses us to do something, that stimulates us. What about the rational faculty, called in Arabic al-Quwa al-Natika, the rational faculty that is in charge of thinking and speaking? Here, Maimonides says, as you see on the slide, but as far as the rational faculty is concerned, here we encounter a perplexity. Nonetheless, I say that obedience or disobedience may be found in this faculty as well, when one maintains a false or a true conception. However, there is no performance, no amal, upon which one may place the label of mitzvah, the positive commandment, or an avera, a prohibition. Therefore, I declared above that mitzvah and avera are to be found only in those 2 parts of the soul, that is, those mentioned in the last slide, the sensation and the faculty that arouses us. So what is this perplexity that Maimonides is speaking about? Now, the scholars that have looked at 8 chapters have indicated that the perplexity is philosophical, apparently because the whole essay is very based on philosophy, on Greek psychology, on the Greek theories of the soul. And so, for instance, Joseph Gorfinkel, who translated the 8 chapters and provided them with some very useful and rich notes over a century ago, translates the key passage as regards the rational faculty, uncertainty prevails, and then he adds parenthetically something not found in the original among the philosophers, but I maintain. So he's clear that he's making it clear that the uncertainty besets some philosophical aspect of the issue. But just as I just remarked, this phrase he adds among the philosophers is not in Maimonides' text. And in fact, Aristotle, in the relevant passages from the Nicomachean Ethics, which Gorfinkel and others point to, does not mention perplexity at all. And Abu al-Farabi's al-Fusul al-Madani, which Herbert Davidson has shown to be a major, perhaps the major source for the 8 chapters, makes no mention at all of this perplexity. Of course, I'm not questioning Maimonides' dependence, or at least usage of al-Farabi's text, and the fact that most of these ideas, or any of these ideas in ethics, go back to Aristotle. But this particular issue, this perplexity, is not to be found there because it is not a perplexity in philosophy. It is a perplexity that arises from Jewish legal thinking and how one determines what is a biblical commandment and not. What is the range of the biblical commandments? To what do they apply? What do they not apply? And the perplexity is a real one, because obedience and disobedience do apply to our maintaining true or false beliefs. Nonetheless, to maintain a true belief or to rid oneself of a false belief is not, Maimonides says, an amal, and hence cannot be legislated. Now here we see that the intimate connection between mitzvah and amal is the source of the perplexity. What makes it makes it impossible to call the belief a mitzvah or an avera, depending whether it's a true belief or false belief, is the absence of amal. Without amal, there is no biblical legislation. Biblical commandments cannot apply to something that does not fall into the category of amal. So we should take a closer look at amal and see what role it has in legal thought and religious thought. And in fact, it has a huge role in the writings in Arabic of Jewish, Muslims, perhaps also Christians, as part of this pair of terms, ilm and amal. You can see that's a sort of the same letters in the root, just the last two consonants are switched. And they said their role is huge. In essence, we divide the range of human spiritual activity into these two categories. Maimonides says, in fact, in the introduction to the commentary of the Mishnah, that from the preceding it has become clear that the telos of our world and all that it contains is nothing but a good and learned individual. The telos, the reason why our world exists, is all for the purpose of a good and learned individual. And what is a good and learned individual? When any member of the human species attains the ilm and the amal, then an individual who has achieved that state is the goal. So these are the two goals for all human existence. And any human who has achieved the both of them has in fact become the entity for whose existence the entire material world exists. Maimonides immediately proceeds to give some more precise definitions of these two terms. He says, by ilm, I refer to the representation to oneself of the truths exactly as they are, as well as the apprehension of all that a human may apprehend. By amal, I refer to the proper balancing of natural matters without sinking into them, but rather by taking only what is necessary for the maintenance of the body and the improvement of temper as a whole. I think it should be pretty clear that ilm refers to knowledge. That is to say, one represents to oneself, one has a mental copy in one's mind of the reality as it truly is, at least with regard to those things that humans can apprehend, because some aspects of reality are beyond human apprehension, no matter how hard we try, no matter how gifted we may be. However, amal, the definition here is a little heavy, and I translated it quite literally, but basically it means taking care of one's body without sinking into this indulgence in sensual matters. We have here a problem as human beings in that our body requires food and other things to keep it satisfied, and these things are pleasurable because that's nature's way of sort of prodding us to go out and get them. But the downside is that because they're pleasurable, we may go out and get a lot more than we need. So amal refers basically to instilling the sort of self-discipline that allows us to take the very minimum that we need to maintain ourselves in a healthy position and not more than that. Later on, in his commentary on Masechet Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, he gives a quite much more concise definition. He says, I'm speaking about the intellectual virtues and the ethical virtues, or the virtues of character, or if you wish, say al-ilm wal-amal. So al-ilm refers to intellectual virtues, and al-amal refers to character virtues. That's basically saying in a much more concise way what he had said in the sentence cited previously. Now, I said earlier that the rational faculty, which is the faculty concerning which Maimonides admits having this perplexity, It governs not only thought, but speaking as well. And in fact, there is an ancient legal tradition, not initiated by Maimonides, preceding him by centuries, which sees speech as something that is sort of on the borderline, let us say, between something which is an action and not an action, and legally speaking, makes it not considered a maaseh in Hebrew, which would be pretty much the same as saying that it's an amal in Arabic. In his letter on apostasy, which Maimonides wrote as a young man, still under the trauma of the Almohad conquest, the slaughter of the Jewish communities in Spain, the forced conversion to Islam, Maimonides is defending his decision, perhaps his personal decision, and the decision he recommends for those under duress to recite the Shahada, simply say a sentence which is innocuous and which the person who's forcing you to say it knows that you don't really accept, rather than being a martyr and dying. Someone had thought that this was the wrong thing to do. Maimonides got extremely angry at him. And in defending this position, Maimonides says, as we see here in the second paragraph, that in doing so, in reciting the Shahada under duress, the persecuted Jew is merely speaking. That's not a maaseh. One should choose death only for to do a maaseh. Speaking is not a maaseh. One could say speaking is not an amal, and therefore it's not a violation of the same sort as, say, someone who will be bowing down to an idol or offering a libation to an idol. So quickly again, the maaseh, which ancient Jewish tradition says speech is not a maaseh, would point to amal, and speech, in Arabic nutq, is governed by the rational faculty, al-quwwa natika, the very faculty concerning which Maimonides expresses his perplexity in the passage cited from 8 chapters. So this would seem to apply not only to matters of belief, which go on completely in our mind, but also to spoken matters as well. And now we're coming to the crux of the issue. Why did Maimonides say that there is perplexity? Because even though obedience and disobedience would apply to beliefs, they are not an amal. Who says that mitzvot have to be an amal? Well, in fact, there seems to have been, there clearly was, a tradition going back to the Gaona, going back to the scholars in the century or so preceding Maimonides, who had begun to draw up lists of the 613 commandments, the traditional count of commandments in the Torah, and had not explicitly, by having some sort of theoretical statement, but in practice, not counted beliefs among the commandments. We have, for example, these counts are found in 2 literary works, or two genres of literary works. One is the Azarot. These are liturgical poems written to be recited or sung on Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks, Pentecost, the festival which celebrates the giving of the Torah, in which quite a number of people had written Azarot, which list the 613 commandments. And the first sort of, not quite systematic, but comprehensive book of the commandments, the Halachot Gedolot, of the Bahag. Both of these are mentioned by Maimonides in his book of commandments, in which he discusses the people who would address the issue before him and why he's dissatisfied with what they had done and what he's going to do a better job of it. I've taken a look at only the Azara of Saadia Gaon, because Saadia was the greatest of them, and it's quite clear that if Maimonides would have seen Saadia's Azara, and in his Azara of the 613 commandments, it begins by saying, "Fear the Lord your God," the Shem Lokecha Tira, biblical quotation. Worship him in prayer. Morning and evening declares unity. So we have here really only one commandment that can be considered something of belief, if fear is a belief, if fear is not an emotional response rather than a rational opinion. The others are verbal, prayer and reciting the Kriyat Shema, which is what the morning and evening declares unity refers to. But there's no reason to suspect that Saadia would have had the same tendency as Maimonides as to look at speech as part of Kual Natika and being in the same category of belief. So really the only thing in Saadia's liturgy which could possibly be considered a matter of belief is fearing God. But the clearest statement of this point of view of the earlier writers on commandments is found not explicitly in the halachot, in the Bahag, but in Ramban, Nachmanides' analysis of the Bahag. Nachmanides, the 13th century writer, was the most incisive and insightful and creative critic Maimonides ever had, and he wrote a very important repercussive commentary on Maimonides' Book of Commandments. And there, in his critique of Commandment number 3, he says, and I quote from the slide, "It appears to be the case that the author of the halachot counted as commandments only those decrees that tell us to do something, or to refrain from doing something. However, belief in his existence is the root and principle from which the commandments derive. They do not figure in the counts of commandments." So Nachmanides has seen, from the way the halachot is constructed, though he hasn't said it, he doesn't have this as an explicit theoretical principle, but he's counting only commandments that tell us to do something or to refrain from doing something, clearly something to which Amal would apply. But belief is something which precedes commandments. As the Midrash cites, I don't have it here in the slide, but the Midrash cited by Bahag and Nachmanides says that God basically said, before I give you commandments, you have to first accept me, recognize my existence and accept me. So belief is something that is a condition, sine qua non, that precedes the giving of commandments, but the commandments themselves all concern doing or not doing. Now, Maimonides' resolution was quite clear, straightforward, and I think path-breaking, and in a way using this term, revolutionary. He simply decided that when he, in his book on commandments, that he would simply redefine commandments and declare outright that they fall into 4 categories: conceptions, actions, character traits, and spoken words. So that the first category means that the Bible does command us to hold fast to a certain conception, such as it's commanding to hold fast to Tawhid, to belief in the unity of God. And I think when it comes to the fear of God, Maimonides is reacting to Saadia, who we're not sure exactly how he viewed fear. Maimonides makes it clear in his Book of Commandments that fear is a conviction, an atikad, something, a belief that one arrives at by thinking about it and becoming convinced that it's true. And he defines the fear of God as a commandment which he has charged us with the conviction that he may be exalted is to be feared and awed, and that we should not be calm and confident, but rather dread the infliction of his punishment at every instant. Now this attitude of impending doom that will come down at any second is something that's worthy of attention in its own right, and I have something on that in the works. It's not directly related to this talk today, but I think Maimonides is deciding to go to such length to make it clear that fear of God is a conviction and not simply an emotional response, is a reaction to Saadia, making clear your fear falls into the category of belief. Now, let me come back for a few minutes to the idea of the philosophical perplexity. As I pointed out, Gorfinkel and others pointed to passages in the Nicomachean Ethics, but also in the Metaphysics, a passage which from the Metaphysics that Maimonides himself cites in the guide, which says basically that mental representation alone does not necessitate motion. One can't set in motion a physical process by thinking alone. Thinking has got to move on to other parts of the soul which arouse the body. And they felt that was what Maimonides had in mind when he said talking about perplexity. But as I said, and I'll say it again, there is no perplexity in this with the philosophers. This is not a perplexity. It's a statement of this, and there would be no reason for Maimonides to call it perplexity if he wasn't thinking above all about Jewish legal thought and to what commandments, what mitzvot can apply to what the concept of mitzvah, category of mitzvah cannot apply. Nonetheless, it may connect somehow to the tradition of not counting mental representation among the commandments, especially with regard to this ancient tradition which I mentioned of considering speech as something, as a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh, to certain forbidden forms of speech, such as when one dedicates an animal for a certain type of sacrifice and then decides to replace it with a different animal by saying, this animal replace that animal, that's considered lav she'ein bo ma'aseh, a prohibition which has no ma'aseh, and we need a special exception to the rule to impose punishment on it. So, to sum up, the perplexity was Maimonides' own, not Aristotle, and not Farabi, and not the philosophers. Both the Jewish tradition of enumerating commandments and the philosophical position that intellect alone cannot initiate motion are confident and perplexity-free. The perplexity was not due to any perplexity in Maimonides' predecessors, either in the Jewish tradition or in the philosophical tradition. Maimonides saw a problem in that basic Jewish beliefs, legislated in divine ordinances, and clearly subject to the judgment of obeisance or lack thereof, were left out of the extant enumerations of the commandments because they were not considered a amal, a maaseh, an action. And so he simply reclassified the mitzvot and brought them in. So Maimonides presented a new classification in which there are 4 categories of commandments. 2 of them, belief and speech, are the 2 actions that fall under the 2 responsibilities of lakul natika, rational faculty, and the other 2 are actions such as the temple rituals, which have their own purpose, and the commandments that are aimed at building character, the ethical restrictions and commandments. Even Saja's ambiguous, I say ambiguous because it's not clear to me, fear of God was clearly and pointedly expressed as artikad, conviction is truth one must assimilate. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you found this interesting and beneficial.